We're in room 101 rather than G1, which is why I have this lovely backdrop here. And if you, the way that the sound system in this room works is a little bit different than when we're in the main room downstairs. So for people in the room, just so you know, all of the sound that the people on Zoom are hearing, instead of coming through the microphones, it's coming through the speakers on this big TV screen. So that means that they can hear me and they can hear you if you speak into the microphone just fine, but they can also hear you if you're talking to your neighbor or if you're drinking your, like gulping your water or whatever it is that you're doing at your table. And sometimes that can make it difficult for folks on Zoom to hear. So I want us to be able to have conversations, but just keep in mind that it's going to be difficult for people online to hear if we have too many side conversations going on, okay? Just an FYI. And I also wanted to make sure that everybody knows about our friends from Wisdom Ways who are here that I don't think have been formally welcomed and introduced since we began. So Katie is here every night. Katie Cornett, she is the events person for Wisdom Ways. She is always here to help set things up and check you in and help with our registration, help with getting, she's the person who sends you your emails every week. So thank goodness for Katie, and we love her, and she's here. So thank you, Katie. And tonight we're also welcoming Sam. Sam is marketing and communications for ACOLA and Wisdom Ways, of which Wisdom Ways is a part of ACOLA as an organization. And they're here tonight to take some photos of folks and help tell the story of Hedgerow to the larger ACOLA family. So if you have any concerns about having your picture taken, or if you have any questions about ACOLA, or if you just want to welcome them, Sam is here with us tonight. So welcome, Sam. And let's see. And I'm Andrea. I haven't taught yet this semester. So far, we've been hearing a lot from Joan Mitchell, who's at a board of trustees meeting tonight for St. Kate's. And so she's not going to be able to join us. But so far, for the first 2 sessions of our Hedgerow time together so far this semester, Joan has been really focusing on some of the early eco-feminist heroes that we have, right? She's been going through especially some of the readings from Ivone Guevara and Rosemary Redford Ruther, and those have been some of the supplemental readings that you've been sent. And as you know, this class in particular, like, we're following along with this book for the most part through the whole semester, right? But then the idea was that we would supplement with some of these influential mothers of theology to help us get some grounding in ecofeminist theology and see where some of the ideas and the scholarship and the culture building that have led to this book came from. So tonight, instead of focusing on the supplemental readings, of which we didn't have any tonight, right? I'm going to be focusing on this book. And we're reading, we read chapter 3 for tonight, and that's the only reading that we had. So it's a lot less reading than we've had lately. Hopefully you got through it. And we're going to think about this particular chapter a little bit more specifically. But we also will draw on some of the ecofeminist foundations that Joan's helped to build, both over the course of the night and as we continue through the class. So I'm going to share my screen. Before I continue, can everybody in the room hear me? Am I too loud?
Too fast.
I'm too fast. It's okay. I will try to slow down. That's a challenge for me, Linda. So just
I know, but
remind me if I start really running off, okay?
I'll do this.
Yeah, like that. Thank you. Okay. All right. So chapter 3. And specifically, we're talking about Saint Loyola of Ignatius. That is a terrible mistake.
Yeah, it's a pretty.
This is not inspiring much confidence in you, is it? Okay, I'm just gonna turn the page. Saint Ignatius of Loyola and ecological conversion, okay? And the picture that I don't want to show you because of my terrible mistake is the Cordner River. That's a river that we're going to be talking about later. But let's start with Jessie Beck. Jessie Beck is a presentation sister. She is the author of this chapter. She is a sister on the younger side, which is true for everybody who's contributed to this book. If you've probably noticed that all the people who've written chapters for this book are youngish, middle-aged to young women. Many of them are religious sisters, but not all. And that was an intentional, Green Saints for a Green Generation. That was part of the intention of the selection for these chapters. So a little bit about her. She's a presentation sister, so PVVM, presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. She belongs to the community that is located in Dubuque, Iowa, but she lives in Chicago. And she serves as the vocations director for the presentations. And she also teaches in a technology department at a primarily, at an elementary school in a primarily Spanish-speaking part of town. And she also has a big history working with Spanish-speaking folks, especially in the southern United States near the border. So she thinks a lot about justice, a lot about immigration, a lot about displacement, migration, a lot of those issues. So I think it's always helpful to know a little bit about the people that have written what we're reading.
I just have a question.
Oh, yeah, hold on, Linda.
Well, her chapter, for me, her chapter was so profoundly beautiful, and in terms of talking about Ignatius and sharing his biography, autobiography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder, is there anything in her life that would prompt that?
That's a good question. I don't know if, she's obviously not formally connected to the Jesuits, as a women religious from the presentation order, but and I don't know enough about her personally. I feel like this book doesn't really do a lot to tell us about the people who write the chapters, does it? Like, I did a little bit of independent digging to see, oh, I probably should stand back here. This is where you can see me on Zoom, sorry folks. So so I wish that I knew more about her, but I do know that she was invited to write this chapter. And she kind of claims at the beginning of it that she's not an expert, she is saying that she wants, thank you, Linda's telling me to slow down. She's saying that she's excited to write this chapter, but that she is not an expert. So, fair enough. Hold on, I'm gonna get you the microphone. Judith?
I did read this. I read another person's, Jackie's book, but I had a question about her. She said she grew up in Iowa, and then she went back and said she found it terribly altered biodiversity there. What does that mean exactly?
What I took from that is that there are certain parts of the United States that are particularly altered by climate change when it comes to, so because of, in some ways, Iowa, like Minnesota, has experienced a lot of temperature extremes, and the predominance of farmland makes a difference there with pesticides and health impacts from farming. So what I took from that statement was that the place where she lives has been changing rapidly due to climate
To the
issues.
negative?
Yeah. Like, we have vote over here, and then I'm good. Yeah, is that not what you read in it, Judith?
Well, I just had a big question because I'm from Iowa, and I just have experienced wonderful environmental efforts down there. My own nephew has a farm to table community. Which, I mean,
That's wonderful.
and he goes and feeds all his beef cows. I just wondered how correct that was, if that was just a.
I'm sure that there are both sides of the story well represented.
The only thing I thought of when she wrote that is mono agriculture, you know, extensive as you travel down 35, it's cornfields from top to bottom. And I think previously there was more variation in the grains that were grown.
I can see that too.
Well, and what I decline in it is recognizing fewer varieties of insects and losing many species. I don't have the statistics, but I know Joan often talks about how she used to hear meadowlarks all the time at the farm, but now they don't anymore because the crops are right up to the road and there's no habitat. So I don't know specifically about Iowa. I'll cry every time I see a monarch because we're losing the monarch butterflies and many others that I don't recognize.
Adrian, I think that's good. I can turn it on to see who's on there.
Oh, okay. I was looking. So folks on Zoom, try to keep your microphones muted if you're not sharing, okay? But also folks on Zoom, because of the way things are set up tonight, if you have stuff to share, please feel free to unmute and just share, because it might be hard for me to see that you're waving your hand or that you're raising your hand, okay? We'll do our best. I see a comment here in the comment section from Ann Shields, and she agrees with what you just said, Kathy, that Iowa plants mostly one crop, corn, with many chemical inputs, cutting down on biodiversity. So does anybody online have something that they wanted to share as we were going through that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. They not only plant, it's basically corn and soybeans is what they plant. 65% of Iowa's, the 65 to 75% of Iowa's corn crop goes to ethanol. And so the state is very dependent on ethanol and wind power. They are very high in that area. Unfortunately, in the 70s, when the farmers were encouraged to plow fence row to fence row, that's when the big decline in biodiversity happened in Iowa. And you're right about the meadowlarks and the little mice and the little animals that used to live in the farm fields. That is true. There's lately been a lot of research into regenerative agriculture and how people plow their fields and what they do with growing. However, it is still predominantly corn and soybeans. My sisters and I own my dad's farms. I could talk to you a lot about farming in Iowa if you cared to know. But we need to go on to the next thing, honestly.
Thank you, Kathy. That's really helpful to me. Okay, I'm going to share my, Christina's clapping. Thanks, Christine. All right. So we read about this, and probably we have a lot of people in the room. I'm thinking of one in particular, Jackie, who knows a lot about St. Ignatius and a lot about Ignatian spirituality. So we're going to have a lot of time for input, and I'm going to try to put you on the spot later, Jackie, if you don't mind, but not quite yet. She's smiling. So Ignatius was born in 1491 in northern Spain. I'm just going to go over broad strokes life, just to make sure that we all know something in common. Spent some parts of his early life as a page in the royal court and was very absorbed in all of the sort of shallow beauty of the royal court and what that was like. He was a soldier and had his leg, the word that's often used that I've read is shattered in battle. So you can imagine what it was like in the 15th century to have your leg shattered and what recovery from that must have been like. During his convalescence as he's recovering, he has his first sort of conversion experience while he's reading about the lives of the saints. Then following that, he has many further conversions. Two that are outlined in the book are when he spends time with the Black Madonna in Montserrat, and when he lives in a cave by the banks of the Cardona River in Manresa. So all of this, a lot of this is happening in northern Spain. He's from the Basque region. If you know anything about that, it's this place of really amazing natural beauty. It's far north in Spain, central. Later, his pursuit of priesthood leads to more than a decade of education. So as he was growing up in the court and living in a cave by the Cardona River, like he's not necessarily getting a lot of education, right? And at this time in history, priests were some of the most well-educated people in all of Europe. So he gets a lot of education all at once, and he meets his buddies, Francis Xavier and Peter Faber, who, if you know anything about Jesuit theology, are kind of a big deal. And they together, really create this Jesuit community that's founded by St. Ignatius. So the Jesuits are founded in 1540. That's when the Articles of Incorporation appear in Rome, and St. Ignatius is canonized in 1622. So this is the sort of major points, very simplified, of the life of St. Ignatius. And the image that I chose here, I've used images by Gracie Morbitzer before. She's written a whole series of icons called the Modern Saints, and she imagines all of these saint heroes that she has as if they were a contemporary person to her life here in the 21st century. And I like this picture of Ignatius of Loyola studying and looking down at his notebook and absorbed in study. And he has, of course, the Ignatian community, Jesuit community, have like more than 290 colleges and universities around the country. In the United States, they have 29 that I was able to find. And one of them was Fordham University, where I studied and learned what I know about Ignatius and Ignatian spirituality. So and that doesn't even count all the elementary and primary schools and things that Jesuits run to. So education is a big deal. So very different from how Gracie Morbitzer sees Ignatius is this painting. And this is, you might recognize the style. It's kind of small, maybe on your screen in the room, but this is definitely Peter Paul Rubens. See lots of rounded pink skin in this picture. This is called The Miracles of St. Ignatius of Loyola. A little bit of a contrast to the way that Gracie Morbitzer presents him in her icon. This is from the early 17th century, and it would have been even before the canonization of Ignatius of Loyola. So it shows just how early and how big sort of the stories and the mythos of this person was. And it also, I think, helps to show from the very beginning, because of how Ignatius of Loyola taught people to pray with their imaginations, that Jesuit theology and Ignatian spirituality plays really well with art. And as a person who's studied theology and the arts, I always like to pay attention to stuff like this, So if you know anything about the Ignatian exercises, and we're going to be talking about this later, Ignatius asks the participants to place themselves in prayer in an imaginative way within all of these scenes, right? Within all of these different ways of being with biblical content. And that kind of imaginative prayer really lends itself to the creative thinking and the artistic process that leads to things. So you might also know of some famous Jesuit artists like Gerard Manley Hopkins. That's a name you might have heard. So Gerard Manley Hopkins' most famous poem is As Kingfishers Catch Fire, Dragonflies Draw Flame. You might have heard that first line. But this particular one, I felt a lot of resonance with the ecological content of our topic tonight. So I thought I would copy this one, and I'll read it to you now. It's called Pied Beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles, all stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire-cold chestnut falls, finch's wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades, their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. So despite the masculine language there, I appreciate this, the language and the imagery of this poem, which was written, you know, in the late 19th century. So another famous Jesuit that you might not have heard of, who's an artist, is Father Arturo Artojo Araujo. Arturo Araujo, that's how it looks. He's a Jesuit American who creates pretty amazing icons. According to these pictures, this is a picture of his installation of art at Rockhurst University, which is in Kansas City, Missouri. And it kind of reflects the global spiritual perspective that many of us associate with contemporary Jesuit engagement in the world, right? So these pictures, I think, are theologically revealing as well as artistically beautiful. So does anybody in the room have something that they'd like to share about what they've learned about Ignatius or Ignatian? We're going to be talking a lot about the exercises in Ignatian spirituality as it goes on, but just maybe about the person of Ignatius. Have you had any experiences or any ideas that you want to share from your own life that you think the people in the room would like to hear? So let's start online. Does anybody online have something they want to share? I can see you now. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Yeah, I learned about him 30 years ago when I went through the spiritual exercises to become a spiritual director. I was trained by the sisters at the Cenacle. And at first he just sounded like this kind of egotistical male who was out for power, and then you know, between his injury and his prayer and the fact that the only books he had access to were stories of the saints, you know, his whole you know, psyche and personality just was transformed. So and I can't say those are the things. Obviously these were major spiritual awakenings that he had over the course of his life, but I really came to admire him and love him, you know, kind of in spite of his early years of being so macho and all the bravado and all that good stuff that was very common in those days.
And also maybe hard to separate with the reputation that the church has built for him since his death, right? Like how much of that, maybe some of that's true and maybe some of it is built up around the story. Yeah, thank you. And let's say our names before we speak, okay?
I'm Judith. I just have a question. What was his theology? Did he follow St. Thomas Aquinas? Did he follow St. Bonaventure? Did he follow Augustine? What was his, I know he studied a lot, but I'm not sure.
Well, he didn't at first, but I think, Jackie, if you want to, this may be a good time for you to talk.
I don't think that he was unduly influenced by anyone. he was a very, very, well, you have to realize, first of all, everything I say will be out of deep love and admiration for him. Everything I say. And his theology and everything about it came directly from his prayer. You know, he was in a cave for years, and he was going through the life of Jesus in that cave. And that's where the spiritual exercises were born, from that. So whenever we think about him, I think it's imperative that we think of him as just a foundation of prayer. And he has given so much to our world. So much. It's just incredible. And his conversion was like the conversion, for instance, of Augustine. He was a womanizer. I mean, you presented him kind of mild. He was a womanizer. He wore these fancy robes. He wanted to be a hero in the war, and so the story of his injury is they were being absolutely overtaken in this war, and he said, "No, we don't give up." And he stood up, and a cannonball came right through his legs. And he just set himself up for that, But I think when I think of him, I don't think of him imitating or being unduly influenced by anyone but Christ.
And that's what Jesuit means, right?
Yes.
Of Jesus.
Society of Jesus.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I just have questions because he sounds a lot like St. Francis. His history was very similar in that he was passionately in love with Jesus. He learned everything about his faith from the experiential contact he had with Jesus. He was also wounded in the war and ended up in a cave.
Yeah, there's similarities like that.
But why was it then that I was guided by Franciscans and they told me to stay away from the Jesuits because I was confused?
That's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense because they used to say the Jesuits are too intellectualized, and actually, I think before Vatican II, they probably were. But in Vatican II, then we were all supposed to go, all the orders, as you know, were supposed to go back to their founding. And then they were supposed to bring their spirituality alive to the world. And of course, Thomas Keating did that, was contemplative prayer along with Basil. And so this is what happened after that, after Vatican II. This spirituality grew so much. And that we'll get to the spiritual exercises later, but I just want to say now that psychoanalysis, people say that to make the exercises is to have gone through years of psychological therapies, Jungian therapy. So there is so much with him. I could take over if you like.
It is kind of silly to stand up in front of you and talk about Ignatius Spirituality. Because how many books have you written on spiritual exercises? How many books have you written?
Quite a few.
Like 10?
13.
13? Yeah. And hundreds of retreats over decades. So yeah, we have a national expert.
42 years of retreats, and they were based on Ignatian spirituality, and people loved it.
May I ask another question? I'm sorry, I don't mean to do this, but so when he writes the poetry, like the Jesuit Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote about the dappled things and the fish and all of this, is his insight that God is in this dappled environment that's created, or is it like? I think it's a big distinction. It's either analogical or anagogical, and I'm just wondering what Ignatius would have thought.
He was really he was really connected deeply with nature. And the Jesuits, as you can see, especially Hopkins, you know, they really, that's what it's all about, is that tread, 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 you know, soil, 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 but still the spirit is there. And it's just, he's very tied to nature, you know.
Yeah, there is a really famous Jesuit saying, God in all things. And that's
And all for the signature piece. The signature piece is all for the honor and glory of God. It's so beautiful.
so to find God in all things is very
Yeah.
Ignatian, and also I would say very Sisters of Saint Joseph, which is more familiar to me. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. And I'm going to spotlight myself as well, just because that helps with the recording. Thanks for your patience. Okay. So here's that work again. But let's get back to Saint Ignatius in our slideshow too. So what inspired him? We've already started talking about this, but Jessie Beck in this chapter argues that the first thing she talks about is that there's some evidence that he talks about the stars and looking at the stars as being influential to his spirituality. So yeah, she talks about stargazing, and who can't connect with that? I mean, it's almost, if it weren't a true experience for so many of us, it would be a cliche that we, you know, you look at the stars and you imagine your context, you know, among the immensity of the universe. And like, it's a very spiritually beautiful experience for a lot of people, right? And one can imagine how that would be the same in the 21st century as it was in the 17th and 16th, you know, when he was alive. So, and 15th even, when he was really young. One of the other things she talks about is this conversion experience that St. Ignatius has with the Black Madonna of Montserrat, right? So this is a picture of her. She's pretty amazing. That looks really beautiful. I don't know how much of this ornamentation, and I mean, it looks almost like the baptistry in the Florence around her, right? The carved, the ornamentation. I'm not sure if that had been there when Ignatius was spending time with her. I imagine probably so. So she's incredibly beautiful, and you can imagine having a conversion experience. But also he was there for quite a while, probably a month. He didn't stay, I'm sure he went outside. And if he did, this is what he would have seen. That's where this monastery is.
Oh, wow.
In the Basque region of Montserrat, it's just phenomenally, uniquely gorgeous, right? And this monastery where she lives is just tucked into this incredible, are those mountains? I don't even know what to call them. They're just so unlike anything I've ever seen before. So the fact that this natural environment had anything to do with Ignatius's conversion experience with the Black Madonna of Montserrat is totally speculation on my part. But it's hard to imagine otherwise, isn't it? Just see that. And then, of course, we've already alluded to it a couple times. Ignatius has what he calls the most influential spiritual experience of his life in a cave on the banks of the Cordner River. So this is a picture. It's a little less striking, I think, than the hills in Montserrat, but still beautiful and still undoubtedly a natural environment. So in the autobiography, St. Ignatius of Loyola wrote this. He sat down for a little while with his face to the river, Cardinor, which was running deep. While he was seated there, the eyes of his understanding began to be opened. Although he did not see any vision, he understood and knew many things, both spiritual things and matters of faith and learning. And this was so great an enlightenment that everything seemed new to him. It was as if he were a new man with a new intellect. So the force of this conversion is so powerful that he feels like it's like a rebirth. It's a new beginning. And he spends years in this cave by the Cardinor River. Just, that's the book of his spiritual life flowing by. So these natural spaces all played a huge role in the conversion in the life of this person who goes on to found this influential movement that has such a big impact on the world. And maybe some of that is true for us too. So on page 37, Jesse Beck says, Ignatius's spiritual experience under a starry sky and beside the deep flowing river invite us to reflect on our own experiences in nature as a way to find hope and inspiration, particularly when navigating the current ecological crisis. So this picture is one that I took while on retreat just last weekend. If you've spent any time in Minnesota, you've probably sat on a bench like this overlooking the body of water. There are plenty of them around, and they're a great place for spiritual reflection and growth. And I think this is my own personal addition, but I think that Beck, the author, is in really good company when she connects the inspiration of the natural world to the ability to move to a new state of understanding or spiritual awakening or social understanding. So here's a book that I've spent some time with. It's called Awe by Dr. Keltner. Has anybody seen this book before? Yeah, Debbie has. Maybe people online. This book describes the feeling of awe as that feeling that we experience when we encounter vast mysteries that transcend our understanding of the world. There's some comments coming in online. Oh, sorry, folks online. Yeah, the Jackie in the room, Jackie Bergen, is one of our fellow Hedgerow participants, and I realized I didn't introduce her well before I called on her expertise. So this feeling of awe that Dr. Keltner is talking about is a lot of the foundational experience that we have when we are in nature and we're overwhelmed with this feeling of sort of spiritual importance. I think that you can connect it to awe in important ways. And this is really important science. So Dr. Keltner is a Stanford PhD educated psychologist. Some of the major social things that he has helped create within the culture they range from like the emotional consultant who worked on Inside Out, that Pixar movie all about emotions. There's a lot of his input about emotional state of being that helped lead to the way that emotions were portrayed in that show. It's kind of a delightful kids show. Has anybody seen that before? Yeah. So he had a hand in that. He also had a hand in his testimony and expertise helped to lead to the elimination of solitary confinement in California prison systems. So he was able to talk about the psychological, thank you, Linda, the psychological harm that solitary confinement does to people and how cruel and unusual that is. And now, that doesn't exist within the California prison system anymore. So he also talks about awe and connection to other people. This ability to experience awe as being a foundation to personal transformation, just like these natural environments were part of St. Ignatius of Loyola's personal transformations, but also an important building block of larger social movements. The collective feeling and drawing on those collective feelings of awe, whether that's good or bad, you know, watching the fire hose on television and in the civil rights movement. That is a negative experience of awe that I think led a lot of people toward action and sympathy with the civil rights movement in the 1960s, right? So it can be a building block that leads to social movements that change the world. You know, just like, and St. Ignatius in both counts is a good example of both the personal and the social transformations.
For goodness sake.
There we go. So with that, let's take a little time to chat with each other, okay? So why don't you take a little time at your tables, and in Zoom, I'll send you to some rooms and talk about, you know, whatever it is that you're thinking of when it comes to what we've been talking about. But also maybe specifically, have you ever experienced a moment of conversion or inspiration connected with nature? Before we go, Jackie's got something to add.
And you know, the way that he prays, the way he teaches prayer using your imagination opens your heart so much that people do have experiences of great conversion just praying like that, because we don't usually open ourselves up like that, you know.
Do you feel like my connection to awe is an apt one in that case too?
Oh, yes, yes, I think it is, because you put your whole body in there. He suggests that we use all our senses in this. And so what kind of day is it when you're praying this scripture passage, and who is anybody with you? You know, what's the feeling in the wind maybe against your hair, and what are you touching, and what are you smelling? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? So all five senses go into that prayer of imagination, and that opens your heart. Maybe maybe when you first start, it might be difficult to pray that way, but then the whole scripture opens up for you when you do. I remember one time, I'll just be brief in this, but there was a priest that came to a retreat, and we were teaching this kind of prayer. So I said, we were using the passage of the Nativity. So go to the manger and be there with the manger with Mary and Joseph and the Christ child being born. So he went there, and then he came back, and I said, so how was that prayer? Well, they needed new straw in the manger. So I put more straw, new fresh straw in there. Well, now that was nice, but why don't you go back and do that again? So we went back and then he came back and he said, oh, it was wonderful. The window was broken, so I replaced the window. So I said, well, no, let's do this again. And then why don't you hold the Christ child and see what that's like? Well, then he came back, he had a whole different story. So it's very interesting that way to pray. Everything comes alive.
Okay, so we're going to take 10 minutes in conversation, okay? Folks on Zoom, feel free to join a group when you are able to. Choices. Thank you.
I wish I could say, yes, it's happened. So, I think, I don't know if I had a moment of confusion or anything. Nature. I don't.
But I guess what I'm thinking about is, if I said so, it's not a conversion
A
yet.
lot of times.
When I was in Geneva to CERN, which is where they have the particle.
And my kids and my grandkids
Yeah.
will continue to do that.
The first two pieces. You imagine yourself
Okay,
in a
folks,
cave with
let's
them.
come back to the large group now. Hope you had some nice
Maybe
conversations.
hear him cry and Mary giving him up and stuff. And you just see what happens.
So I hope everybody had good talks. Before we go on, and we're gonna go on to talk about some more Ignatian spirituality and connection to sort of a green lens towards some Ignatian spirituality that we can look at. But before we do that, we've been talking a lot about ecology and connections to nature. And being that this is an eco-feminist course, how about the feminism? How does that factor in tonight? We're talking about a man who lived a long time ago, right? We're talking about, but I want to make an argument for the feminist influence and the way that we can live this in a feminist way in 2 points, okay? And to do this, like, if you can just like draw your mind back to when Joan Mitchell was teaching us last week and the week before, right? So 2 things about feminist theology that I think are relevant here. The first is that when a lot of these early feminist theological thinkers like Rosemary Radford Ruther and Ivona Guevara were talking about the importance of a feminist perspective in theology, part of it was because theology up to that point had been presented as just the way it was, right? So all of these men who had access to education were saying, this is what it's like when you talk about God. And this is the universal experience of being a person who thinks about this, you know? And so there was a lot of attempts to present a very particular viewpoint from a very particular body moving in a very particular world as being universal. And feminist scholars finally said, that's not my experience. You know, that's not how I see it. This is my story. So I think that one of the beautiful things about this Ignatian theology that we're talking about right now and its connection to ecology is that it also can be about the importance of experience. You know, the feminists really talked about the experience of people's lives being valid theological material. So you didn't have to necessarily be a PhD biblical scholar to be able to talk about how God moved in your life because you were an expert in your own life and experience. And what you brought was valid theological material, whether St. Thomas of Aquinas said it or whether you said it to your mom in conversation over the breakfast table this morning. All of it matters to God. All of it is important. So I feel like that's an important connection that we can bring into this conversation as well, is the primacy of personal experience as a feminist value. Mary Kay is nodding. I'm taking that to heart.
I'm with you, girl.
All right, all right. So the next thing that I think, point number 2 about how we can interpret this conversation today through a feminist lens, is that feminist theology, through its very origins, is about searching for equality and justice. So you can't have a feminist argument without imagining what voices are not being represented, right? Like, what are the stories that are not being told? And those are very feminist stories to tell. And so when it comes to thinking about the environment and thinking about ecology as a theological value, it's impossible to have some of those conversations in 2025 without thinking of, I'm gonna be referencing 2021 in just a couple minutes, but without thinking about the social justice implications of the conversations that we have, right? So just as feminist theology, searches for equality and justice, so do these conversations about ecological theology. So those are 2 of the feminist angles that I'm gonna shove into this chapter that otherwise is short on feminism. How does that sound? Does anybody online or in person want to add anything to that? You're all feminist scholars. I'm sure you have things to share.
Yeah, this is Peg. I was going to say, one thing I've noticed in my own reading is that if one thinks one can only read women in order to experience feminist theology, you're missing out a whole lot of other people, because people can have the values of feminist theology still, even though they were a male writer who wrote a long time ago. Now, that isn't always true, but one doesn't need to discard the entire past to find examples of feminist thinking in theology.
Yeah, and even some of these early examples of feminist theology, right? There's been lots of criticism about how sort of privileged and white early feminist thought is, theological or otherwise, right? So you have a lot of conversations on a lot of the same values that feminists bring to the conversation around a search for justice and the primacy of experience as theological material that leads to things like womanist and mujerista and lots of other queer theologies and lots of other ways of approaching theology from an embodied perspective that that also are really important contributions to these conversations. Okay, so from here, let's go on. I'm gonna share my screen again. Oh, I see a chat. In this next section, again, oh yeah, Annie says Mother Earth and Pachamama, thank you. I'm gonna soon talk to Jackie again. And for folks in Zoom, if you look, people are wondering who she is. If you haven't been in the room, you might not know. Jackie, do you mind waving?
No.
She's in the bright orange sweater, do you see?
Can you get closer?
What did she say?
She wants you to get closer. Hold on.
Close and personal, also people can see.
Extreme close-up.
Here. Hello, 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 hello.
Hello.
If you look at the screen, that's the Andrea Pearson Tandy. I'm sitting with her now. I can. That screen. Okay. Guys, set my screen up again. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the book a little bit on page 39. Jessie Beck quotes a Jesuit scholar named William Wood, who agrees with her about this importance of a sort of a green lens on Ignatian spirituality to the world right now. And he says that throughout the exercises, Ignatius manifests a kind of latent sense of what we know today as the basic principles of ecology. 1, the interrelatedness of all beings. 2, the conservation of all resources by living systems. And 3, greater diversity and variation for healthier ecosystems. So he sees a lot of these things within Ignatian spirituality. On page 42, and I think this draws on a lot of the conversation that we've been having so far tonight, Jessie Beck says, in light of these spiritual truths and Ignatius's encouragement to pray using one's imagination, we can gain a new perspective by prayerfully imagining the ecological healing of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that leads us to the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And this is from some writings that he did that go back to 1522. So this is not new stuff, right? But people continue to use the spiritual exercises as a basis for retreat and prayer today. And I want, Jackie, if you wouldn't mind, as somebody who's done and led the exercises a lot, if you could just give us an overview. What are the spiritual exercises?
I don't want to take away your part. The spiritual exercises are based on the life of Christ. And so it starts out with principle and foundation, which refers to nature, but it begins with, I am of love, for beloved, with love. It's beautiful. I wish I would have brought that with me, but I didn't think of that. And it is really going through the life of Christ. That's what it is. Just imagining yourself doing that. One of the exercises within the spiritual exercises that Maria and I did were to imagine the world and to pray over the world and take like today's newspaper. Oh, pardon me. Why don't you tell me before that? Did you hear me? Sure. That's much better though. Good. Anyway, to pray over the newspaper. I've thought lately I'm not going to get the newspaper anymore. But just to pray over all those events. So that's a prayer of imagination. But the spiritual exercises are really, it's very structured, you know. People criticize it because it's structured. But the beauty is in the structure, because you just follow through the life of Jesus all along the way. And the first part of it is, this is so Marie and I wrote 5 volumes on the Take and 5 volumes in the Take and Receive series that have incidentally really been good sellers, you know. People are interested in this day and age. So the first part of it, of the exercises, is how much God loves you. You know, and all the scripture passages for that are fuzzy and warm. You know, you're precious, I love you, and all that. And then the next part of the exercises is the obstacles you put up to receiving that love. And lots of people drop out of the exercises right then, because they really have to look at, you know, what I have them look at, what patterns are in your life that you have, you know, unintentionally created out of your own psyche to protect yourself. What kind of patterns are there that put up a wall to receiving Christ and to opening your heart to this kind of conversion? So that's the next part. And then the next part of it is the birth of Christ. And this is how it is. It's not the birth of Christ just out there someplace, but it's the birth of Christ within you. What difference does it make if Christ is born, but he's not born within you? So then the next part of it is surrender, and how you surrender everything to God. You just let go of those patterns and move into deep prayer then. Then the next part is the last part, and that's called freedom. And that means community. What community is formed then? Because people are loving each other and they're following the way of Christ relationally. It's just down to earth. How, you know, that's what I like about being old. I like being old gives me the opportunity to look back at my life and to see how God's loved me. But it also gives me the opportunity to see how I've screwed up. So, and ask forgiveness again before I die, you know, in these late years, to look at how you're loved, to look how you need to be forgiven, and you look how you surrender everything, because you have to surrender it, because you're too old to hang on to it. And then if you're very fortunate, you'll experience community like we're experiencing right now. So it's just, if you haven't made the exercises, find yourself a really, really good spiritual director and do it. Because it's just the most wonderful thing.
Thank you, Jackie. So I'm sure a lot of you already have done that.
Don't ask me any more questions.
Okay, and Jackie is asking us if you have any more questions. So
because I'm afraid I'm talking too much.
Thank you for being willing to have me put you on the spot. I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, that's all right. I just feel like I want you to talk.
Okay.
It's your class.
Oh, geez. Okay, so another of so Ignatius, as we have already heard too, was, the spiritual exercises are kind of a prescribed way of praying. They're supposed to take 4 weeks. 4 weeks are not necessarily literal weeks, but many times are. Is the way that they're structured. But there's something that Ignatius also taught as a daily way of prayer called the examen. And that's something that Jesse Beck in this chapter offers as perhaps a pattern that can be used from a green perspective as a way to help people process sort of their spiritual lives within an ecological frame. So, and some key words here for both the exercises and this experience of examen, which we're going to continue to talk about, are consolation and desolation. So within spiritual discernment, really what that means is like, pay attention to how you feel, and when you feel despair or joy, what's that mean? Where's that coming from? What do you learn from that?
One more thing.
Sure.
So discernment is the signature, one of the signatures of Ignatian spirituality. But if you have a great big decision to make, you have this wonderful way of discernment. So you write down the pros and cons, which of course we all know that if we're making a big decision. But then it goes further. So for the first 3 days, you act and think as if you're going to, like if you're discerning going to Europe. So I would discern that, for 3 days I'm going to go to Europe. And what am I going to bring now? What am I going to pack? And where am I going to go? And what do I most want to see? And what really nice thing maybe I should bring? And you think you're going there for 3 days. And then you go for 3 days. I'm not going to go there. It's too expensive. I've got too much work to do at home. I won't go. And then you see, how do you feel? In those 3 days that you went, did you feel joyous? How did you feel? And then in the 3 days you didn't go, how did you feel? Disappointed and sad? Or did you feel like, that's really true? It's a marvelous kind of discernment.
Yeah. And it can help you make big decisions, but it can also just help you in the course of your everyday life. Like, I felt despair when I acted in this way, or when I spent too much time with whatever in my life, and it can help you make a different decision in the future. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm deciding something, but I'm living in a way that brings joy and fulfillment rather than desolation and despair.
I always say it's
Andrea?
life-giving and spirit-filled.
Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jackie, for doing that, because he wrote, so many pages about that discernment, and I love how you boiled it down. My favorite question of his at the end, I take the first, 4 steps, but my favorite one at the very end is to think, he's very dramatic about it. Think of yourself on your deathbed. What will you have wanted to have done? Mm-hmm. And so even without making it, dramatic with the deathbed, it's how my son chose the graduate school he went to, because he, it was like, following that whole path, and the what will you have wanted to have done has made me make so many decisions that I probably would have either chickened out on or something. But it gave me the courage, because that's what I knew I would have wanted to have done.
Thank you, Christine. So I want to talk a little bit more about this examen, and that I had a little video that I'm going to forgo. I'll maybe include it in the email that explains it a little bit more. But rather than being this big, exercises type thing that's led by a spiritual director. An examine is something that you can just do yourself, and it's meant to be done daily. And really it's the process of looking over the very ordinary things of your life and seeing what movements it brings up within you. And giving thanks, asking for forgiveness, going to bed. I mean, there's generally 5 steps that go into it. And over the course of life in Ignatius's time and shortly after, we're going to skip you, sorry. Okay, so here's this really interesting piece of artwork that I found in doing this, and it's from 1650, which is not very long after Ignatius has been canonized a saint, right? So it's not been all that long since he was actually on the earth, and it's kind of a spooky picture, but it's like how to teach the examine to people who are mostly illiterate in Northern Europe at the time, right? So it uses a person's hand to talk about the 5 different steps of this examine process. And clearly, whoever made this diagram is in the process of like teaching people about how to do this prayer and how to incorporate it into their lives, at one of the early stages. So I just thought it was kind of an interesting example that showed how interwoven into the culture some of the spiritual practices were. This is from Belgium. So on page 44, Jesse Beck says, Ignatius's guidelines for discernment of spirits, which comes from the exercises and from the practice of this examine, can guide us out of despair and into hopeful, faith-filled action. And I argue, and Jesse Beck doesn't go into this in her chapter, but we're talking about green saints for a green generation, right? We're talking about young people. And there's been a lot of scholarship in recent years about climate despair and how young people are living daily with real serious effects of living in a world where the climate is changing, and they're going to have to live with these impacts. So in this picture, there's young people holding signs about the longer you delay, the more we will pay, planet over profit, different ways of expressing despair and fear and anger at the position that they're being put in the way that we treat the world. And here's where the 2021 came from earlier out of my mouth. So there was a study from the Lancet Planetary Health in 2021 where they created more than 10,000 data points, interviews with young people, 16 to 25 years old, to talk about how they feel about climate change and what's doing in their everyday life. And I know this is a lot of words here, and I'll just skim, but things like 84% were at least moderately worried about climate change. 50% reported each of the following emotions: sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, guilty. 45%, almost half of people from this age group, said their feelings about climate change negatively affected their daily life and functioning. So this is not just a hypothetical situation for people. They're dealing daily with these effects of desolation, of despair. And as we know, for social movements to be effective, and they can't come from that place, right? So I think that what Jesse Beck is talking about as far as finding a way to spiritually center and process these feelings of desolation as presented to us in this climate crisis, we have to find a way of getting through this in order to get to the point of making positive social change. And of course, here's a Jesuit who's had something to say about climate justice in the recent past, right? And in fact, just last week, there was a big climate conference celebrating the 10th anniversary of the issue of Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which is all about climate crisis and the response, the spiritual response, and the way. And anyway, this is my way of putting together my thesis for tonight's class. Okay, and this is the idea of a call for ecological conversion. So It's not just a personal spiritual conversion brought about by inspiration from nature, although that is important. That's our Cardener experience, by the river. That's being changed by our time in front of the Black Madonna in Montserrat. Like, these are experiences, hopefully, that we all have a chance to experience in our lives. And they're really important. And it doesn't stop there, right? It's also not just a conversion toward protection and care of creation as a spiritual value. So to see action for climate as being motivated by my identification as a spiritual being, right? Like, I see that as an action that's motivated by spirit. Not just those things, but a turn toward the realization of mutual indwelling and interconnectedness of all creation. That's the core of it, right? And all of these other things that helped to lead there. And I think that some of the greatest teachers too that we've heard from on these topics also are connected to Jesuit theology, right? So I know that many folks in the room are greatly influenced by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit theologian of the 20th century, who had a lot to say about mutual indwelling and the interconnectedness of all creation. And also, she gives, Jessie back in the chapter, gives a quote that ends, I've been neglecting my notes here, so I don't even know where this is anymore. So anyway, this is a picture of the Jesuit Observatory in Italy. And it may seem a curious thing for a religious community to invest in an observatory, which is for looking at stars and planets and the cosmological sphere, right? Like, what does that have to do with the religious community? And yet I think that the idea of profound interconnectedness with all of creation makes that kind of exploration and that kind of understanding on a scientific level a deeply important act. And I think that this is an investment that shows that continues to be the case for the Jesuits. So find God in all things. It's on page 50. So let's end our class tonight. We have a couple more minutes. And I would like to together do this practice that Jessie Beck outlines on pages 42 and 43, which is an examine that is got a green lens, okay? So it's a process of reflecting in a way that centers nature and ecological processes, okay? So I'm just gonna go through the steps that she describes in the chapter and see what surfaces for you. So step number one, give thanks in your mind. Think of your day. We're at the end of our day. I'm ready to go home. You probably are too. You've experienced a lot today. Think of the very specific actions, the very specific people. What did you have for lunch? Was it delicious? Are you thankful for that? What are the things, the specific things of your day that are worth being thankful for? Number two, here she says, ask for the grace to see creation as God does, in all its splendor and suffering. Do I see the beauty of creation and hear the cries of the earth and the poor? Is there any specific piece of your day that sheds some light on this for you? Then again, how do my life choices impact creation? Can you think of a moment today when you're reminded of the impact that you have on creation? Of course, we can't do a single thing without impacting the world around us, but is there a moment of your day? I'm thinking of watering my flowers. I'm thinking of filling up my car with gasoline. Number 4, ask for a conversion toward ecological justice. How can we be reformed in a way that centers Earth? Number 5, ask for reconciliation and solidarity. How can we repair these relationships? Is there something I might do differently next time? And finally close by remembering the earth and the vulnerable of society.